Hello everybody, this is your host Tim Ash, the CEO of SiteTuners, and today we are very excited to bring to you one of the foremost experts in the world on content marketing. Now, as you know, we're very focused on conversion rate optimization, but a lot of times without the support of the proper content on your site to demonstrate credibility, to build trust, it's pretty much impossible to get somebody to convert on your site. So Joe is going to talk about that. He is going to speak at internet speed, and for those of you that can't follow along that quickly, we will have a video recording of the whole webinar available, as well as the slides. Just stand by, you'll get a follow-up email from us. If you want to tweet the webinar, today's hashtag is Joe's10, and CRO, or conversion rate optimization, if you want to get in on the general conversation. Joe's Twitter ID is HuntaJoe, and mine is Tim_Ash. So let me tell you a little about Joe. He doesn't really need a lot of introduction. One thing I want to start with is that obviously we're both fans of the color orange. So great color scheme, Joe. It's almost like we coordinated outfits today or something. Those are our brand colors as well. He is the head of the Content Marketing Institute, and as well as the chairperson and founder of the Content Marketing World event series, which is held every year in Ohio and Sydney, Australia, and the best-selling author of multiple books. So without any further ado, here's Joe.
All right, so today's agenda, we're going to move really fast. I've got 80 or so slides. Hopefully there'll be pretty pictures that'll keep you entertained. I'm going to start talking with a brief history about content marketing, talk about some research, talk about something I like to call the problem with what, and then we're going to get to lots of activities. I'm sure we've got more than 10, but 10 was a nice solid round number. Things that I like to call separating the good from the great in content marketing. So I want to start out with a story, and of course this is about content marketing, so we definitely want to start out with a story. I'm going to start out talking about this young entrepreneur, let's call him John, and this is back in 1837. And John had an innovation, and that innovation was basically the fact that he created a plow that instead of being tipped with iron, that plow was tipped with steel. This was something that was new, and then why that was an innovation was that iron plows got mud stuck to it. It was very hard. You had to get out, get down, get that mud off, and then have the horse do its thing and plow through. But what John had is he had steel-tipped plow, but the problem is he had no money, no way to market it, couldn't figure out how to compete with the big boys that basically just had more awareness and more farmers using that. So he said, well, how do I get this top of mind, and how do I really get farmers to think about my innovation of the steel-tipped plow? And so you know what we're going to do? John was going to set up classes, and John started to put together classes for farmers that could get together, and basically they were business improvement classes. And what John believed was if we educated farmers and basically made them smarter about how they do business, that they'll think that I'm more credible, and they'll start to look at me and my products and say, and actually we can start a business that way. So it was this whole teaching culture, and it was very successful because in a few years after that became very, very popular, and you might know the company, and that company is John Deere. So John Deere, and it's wonderful to see John Deere flourish, because what they've really been able to do is through the art of teaching and through the philosophy of teaching and storytelling, they became one of the leading brands in the world. And here they continued this back in the late 1800s. I believe the year was 1896. Started a magazine called The Furrow. This is the best picture that I could get from 1931. But they continued that storytelling and said, look, now we've got farmers all over the world, and how do we take that teaching mentality and that storytelling to make them smarter and to solve their pain points? How do we do that when they're all over the place? Is that we're going to create a magazine. That was the channel at the time, created The Furrow. And most people don't realize this. The Furrow today, and there's a picture of it on the right there, The Furrow is the most circulated farming magazine in the world, with more than 1.5 million subscriptions around the world, 14 languages, 40 countries. So there's a good trivia question. Hopefully you get one thing out of this. You can say, well, what is the most popular farming magazine in the world, and who creates that? It's not a media company, folks. It's actually from John Deere. And then just another example for you, and the reason why I'm showing you this is a lot of people think that content marketing is new. Actually, content marketing has been around for hundreds of years. Case in point, You know how Jell-O got its start. I mean, how do you market Jell-O? I mean, just think, I mean, we've got hundreds of different yogurts and things like that today, but back then, in the early 1900s, how do you actually think about marketing Jell-O? And it was very hard. It was 2 ownership changes. They couldn't do it. And the third owner, they came around and said, you know what we've got to do? We've got to get them trying the Jell-O. We've got to integrate that into what they already do. And they actually went door to door in different locations and gave away free recipe books that had Jell-O ingredients in it. And oh, by the way, in those outlets, the grocery stores had Jell-O if you wanted to try it. And a year later, they became $1 million brand, and now Jell-O is a $1 billion brand. So the reason why I'm telling you this is that the art of content marketing, art and science of content marketing, is very, very old indeed. It's just that content marketing has sort of been given a makeover. You can call it custom publishing, branded content, custom content, whatever you want to. I started using the term content marketing back in 2001 because it started to resonate with CMOs, and now it's really taken off, and more organizations are adopting the philosophy of storytelling and content marketing. Here's the only slide where I'll give you a formal definition, just because I think it's important to talk about what is and what content marketing is not. And that second line is the most critical. This is owning your own media channels and not renting. And why do we want to own our own media channels? It's to attract and retain customers. How do we attract and retain customers? By creating valuable, compelling, and consistent content. And what separates content marketing from content? It's that last line. We need to see a change or some enhancement or maintain a behavior. I mean, that's really why we're in business. Content marketing is marketing. It's not just content because we want our customers to feel good, although that's fantastic to have them do that, but we really need to see something happen for the business. And it's really important, this idea that we are all publishers now. That's, in essence, if you were going to say, Joe, give me the short definition to content marketing, I would say it's basically the idea that we are all publishers now. We need to think and act like publishers. But there is a difference between what you do as a marketer and what publishers do, but there's only one difference. So if you think about that for a second, about what that one difference is, it's this. It's how the money comes in. Let me give you an example. If I'm a media company, if I'm a publisher, 99% of the business models out there, you get your money in 2 ways. First of all, I'm going to create a piece of content and somebody's going to sponsor that content. Let's say through a display ad online, or let's think about a magazine. If I was Inc. magazine, I want Google and American Express and those types of companies to advertise and support that content. That is part of the business model, and the other part of that business model about how the money comes in is if I was going to sell subscriptions. So I'm going to buy a subscription to Inc. magazine. The 99% of the content created in the business models on the publisher side, that's how it's done. If you are a marketer, how do you make money off of the content you create? You sell more products and services. Absolutely, but all other things are basically the same, and I'm going to talk a lot about that in this presentation because it's critically important, because we're seeing the revolution and the evolution of the marketing department, and it's starting to look and feel more like a publishing department. I've been in the publishing industry for 13 years now, and it's amazing now that I go in, we work with mostly Fortune 1000 brands, to see these brands actually look and feel like what we were doing in the year 2000, 2001, 2002, when the market wasn't crashing, that is. So when we talk to Fortune 1000 companies or any companies out there, this is what we hear. I got to get found in Google, right? Search engine optimization. I got to drive online leads, lead generation, and I've got to figure out how to make social media work for my company. The core to those 3 things is storytelling. It's compelling, consistent, helpful content at the center of this. That's your content strategy. And unfortunately, what we see is we see a lot of tactics being drawn out. It's like, oh, I got to get found in Google, or I want to do this Facebook thing, or I want to launch a blog, or they're thinking about it the wrong way. They're really going to channels first, and what you want to do is take a step back and figure out why you are telling these stories in the first place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple of examples of what I feel are really good examples of trying, and one example of really doing it well, and then try to bring that back into some very tangible essentials on how you can launch this in your own business. So this very, very happy man is Mr. Jonathan Mildenhall. Jonathan is what I would call the chief content evangelist for the Coca-Cola Company. And if you've seen the movie Jerry Maguire, which I'm sure most of you have, remember that point in the movie at the beginning when Jerry Maguire wakes up, he's in a sweat, And he basically comes up with this epiphany, and that epiphany is that their sports agency needs to have less clients and more client contact with less clients, right? So that's what I would call Jerry Maguire's mission statement. You remember the blue folder that he went in and ultimately got fired over. Well, Jonathan Mildenhall had a Jerry Maguire mission statement, but actually didn't get fired. He got promoted, and it was this. It's called Coca-Cola Content 2020, which was developed years and years ago, and it was put on YouTube, and you can check this out, by the way, Coca-Cola Content 2020. It's on YouTube. There's 2 videos. One's 7 minutes and one's 10 minutes. And I think that everyone in marketing needs to view these 2 videos. It's basically Coca-Cola's strategic plan for content, and the slide that you're seeing is a really good representation of what that 17 minutes is all about. What Jonathan Mildenhall is saying here, he's saying that Coca-Cola has done a great job over the years of this creative excellence, idea of creative excellence. And of course, they spend more and they've done more great things in marketing and advertising than most. But he says now we need to move to something called content excellence. We have to tell compelling stories. They call it liquid storytelling. And they've been really trying to push this culture change within Coca-Cola that, as we said, spends a ton of money on advertising. So they're trying to change their culture right now with this whole idea of storytelling. And the representation, and this just happened a couple months ago, if you haven't seen it, it was covered in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. This is Coca-Cola Journey. And basically what they do is they are starting to tell stories that they believe, some are about Coca-Cola and some are not about Coke at all, but they feel that would resonate, that their customers, prospects, evangelists, advocates would want to share and get the word out about what Coca-Cola is doing. They have 4 full-time writers, journalists on this project, and 40 freelance writers basically creating and curating stories about what they feel is important to Coca-Cola's audience. This is a significant departure from what Coca-Cola has done in the past. So I guess what I would say is I would implore you to take a look at what Coca-Cola is doing. And the reason why this is so important, because if Coca-Cola is doing it, I consider it sort of a watershed moment for the content marketing industry, because now people are really taking this seriously now that companies like Coca-Cola have gotten on the bandwagon. So it's great. That's a great start. I'm going to keep an eye on what Coca-Cola is doing for sure. But if you were to say, Joe, what's the one company that really does this well and why? The future to me is Red Bull. I don't know what it's with the sugary drink category, but they've got it together when it comes to content marketing. If you look at Red Bull's media house, Red Bull Media House is basically a publishing entity within Red Bull. Let me give you some examples of that. By the way, I use this line all the time. This is part of our Facebook content strategy. Nice little tweetable moment if you're on Twitter, and I really do believe this. I say it all the time. Red Bull is a media company that just happens to sell energy drinks. You've heard this out of their senior management. They really look at them being in 2 businesses. One, they are in the business they're in of sugary, caffeinated energy drinks, and they're also in the publishing industry. And my good friend Jay Baer, author of The Now Revolution, has got a book coming out called Utility. He talks about that all the time, that us businesses, we have to think of ourselves in 2 businesses at the same time. And this is something we didn't have to think about in the past. But with Red Bull, let's break it down a little bit. They have Red Bull Content Pool. You remember a couple months when the guy was, did the space jump and had Red Bull all over him? Well, you know who that content was owned by? It was owned by Red Bull. And Red Bull distributed that content out to media, and they actually made money off of that, believe it or not, let alone the wonderful publicity that they have. But they have a content pool where media companies and non-media companies, other brands, buy content from them. This is actually a revenue profit center for them. Did you know that Red Bull had a record label? Most people don't realize that. They have a full-service independent record label that they have. They have one of the most fantastic digital magazines I've ever seen. So if you're looking for a really good example of a digital magazine, a lot of rich media integrated, a lot of video, please check out their iPad app for the Red Bulletin. And by the way, print is not lost on this group. They have a number of international and locally translated issues of their print publication called the Red Bulletin, and as well really going out to this enthusiast crowd. And here's, I could go on and talk about Red Bull for a long, long time, but they have television stations, radio stations, other print materials. It is amazing that Red Bull is not thought of more as a media company, because when you say Red Bull to me, I say, oh, that's a media company. And and what I predict, and of course a lot of my predictions are wrong, but what I would say is that Red Bull will go into a lot of different product categories because they have ownership of this enthusiast category. And I think that we've just seen the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what Red Bull is actually going to sell from a product standpoint. I'm going to digress just for a second. Let's just take your breath from that. Hopefully there's a couple of good examples that you can learn from. I'm going to show you a little bit of research, and then we're going to get on to some really helpful tips before we get into the Q&A back with Tim. So let me show you some research. This is research. This is our third year doing this research on content marketing. Content Marketing Institute and Marketing Profs put together this research. If you're interested, sorry I didn't include the link. If you're interested in this research, it's available for free. Just go to contentmarketinginstitute.com/research or go to the homepage and click on research, and you'll get our B2C and B2B research. Basically what we found, we talked to over 2,000 marketers from around North America, and what we found is that 91% are using content marketing in one way, shape, or form. So basically all of us are using content marketing. And by the way, it doesn't mean we're all using it well. It means we're just using it. So I'm going to get to some stats in a second that'll sort of show that. As an overall, from a content creation and distribution of that content, we're seeing an average of about 33% budget. So every $3 and $10 of a marketing budget is spent on content creation and distribution. That's up year over year from 26%. Small companies spend a lot more on it because they have a lot less paid media. Large companies spend a lot less on it because they have a lot of paid media that they're still doing. And I'll zoom in on this if you can't see this chart. It's a really good chart, and it really makes the case for the idea that we are indeed all media companies. We are indeed all publishers. If you look at all the things that you're doing, and if you look at this, you'll say, yeah, I do that, I do that. Yes, you are creating content. You are publishing content. But maybe you haven't thought about the idea that you are a media company. If we zoom in on this, 87% are creating content specifically for social media outlets like a Facebook. 83% have educational articles on your website. 78% have e-newsletters. What's interesting about the blog number on the next one of 77% have blogs, if you look at research from IBM, IBM says that 85% of corporate blogs have 5 or less posts. I'll let that sink in for just a bit because it's a pretty amazing number. So of all these blogs, 85% have only 5 or less posts. That means we're really good at starting things as marketers, but not really good at consistency, and that is probably the key to making content marketing work. It's consistency. It falls outside the campaign. It goes on and on with us because content is a promise to our customers, and we've got to keep that promise. And then on and on and on. 69% in-person events. That's been our most, if you ask for what's the most effective content marketing tactic that we go and ask, it's always been in-person events is the most effective. Webinars, white papers, research reports, on and on and on. So you get the idea. 54% are increasing their budget over the next 12 months, so we're going to continue to see growth in this category. And then some of the differences when we ask, what really affects it, and this is self-reported, by the way, most effective versus self-reported least effective marketers, what did we see? We see a big difference in budget. More tactics are used, so the slide right before when we talked about tactics, so the more effective marketers are using more of those tactics. They use more social platforms, but here's the big differentiator. They tailor content profile to the decision maker. That means they have a buyer persona, that multiple buyer personas, and they're taking specific steps in their content strategy to alter that content to fit that profile. Very, very important. And of course, the most effective, they don't have a challenge with C-level buy-in, and they're not challenged with producing that content. I want to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But why are we really here? Why are all you people, hundreds of people on this call today? It's because 36% of you believe that they're effective. And I want to stay on this for a second because it's of critical importance. If we think about what the slides I just showed you, so 90% are using content marketing, 54% are increasing, and 36% believe their content marketing is effective. What's the definition of insanity, folks? That means a lot of people out there that feel their content marketing is not effective, they're still increasing their budgets, and they're just basically throwing content at the wall. I don't understand that they're. Just to digress for a second, Tim and I were just talking before, I do a lot of in-person events, and I did about 60 events last year that I did a keynote presentation or a breakout session, and I always ask the question, how many of you have a content strategy for your content creation efforts? And literally across the board, I've never got more than 5% to raise their hands. So what that means is we're being very tactical and channel focused. We're focusing, oh, we need content for the blog or our e-newsletter or white paper, but we're not thinking, what is our strategy? Why are we really doing this? What actions do we want to see from a business model standpoint? And I'll go on, and this is a really telling stat. So when we ask what their biggest content marketing challenges are, number one is producing enough content, and I don't believe that at all. And there's two, if we look at that challenge of producing enough content, I could make a couple thoughts about why that is. First off, we could say, oh, more of us have buyer personas, and because we have more buyer personas, we have to create more customized content and tailored content for those buyers. Great, that's one way to look at it. You could also look at it as we just have so many more channels that we've gotten our hands into, and we feel we need to create more content, but it doesn't have a strategy, and a lot of that content is a waste of your customers' time as well as your marketing resources. I think it's the latter is the issue and not the primary. I'd like to think it was the primary, but I just don't think we're going that direction. And I call this the problem with what? And we work with mostly billion-dollar companies, and we get stars in their eyes just like any other company would get, and they come to me and say, Joe, have you seen American Express Open Forum? By the way, if you haven't seen it, it's a great example of content marketing. This is a small business resource around financial and marketing issues and really wants to be the resource, and American Express wants to answer their questions. And by doing that, they've been able to generate a ton of new inquiries on credit cards. But they say, Joe, I want to do American Express Open Forum. Can we do that? Or they'll say, I want to have a Twitter content presence like Starbucks does. Or they'll say, Joe, I want to have a Pinterest strategy. Let's figure out, what are we going to do on Pinterest? By the way, this is my Pinterest board for Orange, which has no business purpose at all. But if you like Orange and are passionate about it the way that I do, I have a Pinterest pin board dedicated to that. But we actually get, seasoned marketers that are so channel focused. They say, what is that Pinterest or that channel strategy when they need to be taking a step back and they're asking the wrong question? And that really the question what I want them to ask and what we get to and what I hope that you ask by the time we're done with this presentation is why. What I want you to do is for every channel that you are creating content for, I want you to step back and ask yourselves why you're in that channel. Why do you have a blog? Why do you have a Facebook page? What are you trying to get out of it? What is your content strategy? Who is your target audience? What is your ultimate call to action, and how does that integrate with everything else that you're doing? It honestly doesn't take that long. It's a good exercise to go through. So before you're saying how can you create any more great content, I would stop and figure out, we would call it a content audit. Really do an audit of what you're doing right now from a content creation and distribution standpoint, and figure out if there's any of that you should stop doing, because I guarantee you're doing a number of things that you should stop doing that's not worth your time. And if you're asking for like one of these essentials that you can take away, I would recommend that you need a content marketing mission statement. I believe this is the core for your SEO, your social media, and your lead gen goals online. Now, what is a content marketing mission statement? Let me go back to the Inc. example. Let's say that you're Inc. magazine, you're Inc. the media company, and you have a content mission statement, or what we would call an editorial mission statement. You go to their About Us page, you will find it. And it says basically, Inc. is in the business of creating actionable, relevant, valuable content to small business owners and entrepreneurs in order for them to be more profitable. That is our content marketing mission statement. My question to you is, what is your content marketing mission statement? Why are you creating the content? What pain points are you solving from your customers when it comes to their informational needs? And once you figure that out, how are you going to make this help this move the business? So that's really about what your content marketing mission statement should be. And if you want more information on how to do that, just type in content marketing mission statement into Google, and I've got a couple articles on the topic about how to do that. So there's the Inc. example, right? I want you to think of yourself like a media company. If you were the leading trade publication for your industry, how would that change your thinking about how you market? I think that's every company needs to do that today, and I don't think we do enough of it because we're so focused on most of the content that we create. It's about us. We're talking about ourselves, and we've got to realize that our customers don't care about us, our products, or services. They care about themselves. They care about their own pain points. So you have to create compelling content that's so compelling it cuts through all that clutter, because as more companies are doing this, the more clutter that's out there, it's harder to get through with really good content. And really be their resource. And when they are ready to buy, they will buy from you. All right. So take a deep breath. I'm going to take a drink of water here. And I've got about 15 to 20 minutes here, and I'm going to go through some trends as essentials. I've got a number of them in here as we go throughout this presentation. I'm going to give you some good case studies on how to go through it. And again, my goal is to really, you can spot one or two things that you can make actionable in your business today as you go through. So the number one trend that we're seeing, and when we look at the research and look at how, us working with the brands that we work with, is this idea of the content platform. But really go further than that and really look at the niche non-sales platform. This is not about products. This is not about what we're selling. It's about being a true helpful resource for our customers. Now, if you look at this site, Homemade Simple, I want you to take a guess on who would you think that produces this. Maybe some of you have been to this site. Maybe you know. Homemade Simple. It's targeted for the on-the-go mom, not just the stay-at-home mom, but the mom is working, busy, trying to take care of the family. Homemade Simple is created by Procter & Gamble, and it's been going since 2003, believe it or not. And this is a media site. A lot of people see the site, they'll say, oh, is that done by Meredith? Is it done by Martha Stewart, like traditional media companies in that space? No, it's done by a brand. It's done by Procter & Gamble. And they've been able to sign up, I don't know what the number is now, but the last I heard, well over 10 million people have signed up to get regular updates from Homemade Simple. How would you like that? 10 million people to raise their hand and say, yes, Joe, I would like to get your marketing. Would you please send it to me? That's exactly what they're doing. Very, very valuable from an email and a database standpoint that they're driving. Here is their content marketing mission statement in a nutshell. Enabling women to have more quality time with their families. That's important. Why is this important to have something like this? Because what happens if you don't have a content marketing mission statement, you could just create any kind of content. How would you know what to create and what not to create as part of your content strategy? You don't know. So I'll tell you, if this is my content strategy and I'm Procter & Gamble, I know that if I'm talking about something for dads, it's not going to fit in the strategy. I can cross that off the list. If one of your employees come and say, oh, I want to do this article, and say, oh, sorry, doesn't fit in our content marketing mission statement, not a part of our content strategy. Very important to have this be the go, no-go line. So that's why I think it's critical to get something like this. Let me give you another example. Another Procter & Gamble site. This is beinggirl.com. I have to be honest with you. I don't spend a lot of time on this site. I have two young boys, 9 and 11, and some of this content on this site actually scares me. But this is another good example from Procter & Gamble. And what is their content marketing mission statement? It's this: enabling teen girls to be more confident with their sexuality, or probably better said, be more confident with their bodies. That's what the goal of this one is, and that's the content that they create around this content portal, content platform. And then here's something that's more up my alley, right? This is manofthehouse.com. If you look at some of the content on here, it's targeted to somebody like me. 5 weird facts about your wife's brain. I'm looking at that saying, boy, that's an interesting piece of content. I'm going to click on that because they're targeting somebody like me. What is their goal? And their content marketing mission statement is helping men become better men, which any of you women out there would say is a completely impossible goal. Very, very, very hard to do this goal, which is the reason why they've struggled with this site, but the other two have flourished. By the way, the Being Girl example, Forrester did an independent study on beinggirl.com and said that that site was 4 times more effective than any advertising campaign they'd done to that target audience. So I love that it was an independent study that worked on that and said how much more effective content creation was than advertising when it comes to that. All right, so my number 2 trend, and I don't have a good term for this, but I've been calling it story explosion because I think it's a cool term, but it's the idea of really repurposing and reimagining story from the start and not after the fact. Let me give you a couple of examples, and just to preface this, what happens in most companies from a repurposing standpoint, somebody will say, oh, I'm going to do a white paper, I'm going to do a video, I'm going to do a blog post, and then they think of, after it's done, then they think of ways to repurpose that content, which is completely the wrong way to do it. So if you're doing it that way, don't do it that way. What I want you to do is come up with a story idea first, why you're creating that content, and then look at your channel strategy ahead of time. And let me give you a really good example of how that works for Kelly. So if you remember the old Kelly girl, it's Kelly Services, but this Kelly Services, they target global companies, large companies with big deals, targeting C-level and long time to close, 12 to 24 months. It's complex workforce solutions. And Todd Wheatland is the VP of Thought Leadership at Kelly. He's a good friend of mine, and he's helped create this site. If you look at this site, it looks like a media site. There's a ton of content on the site. And talking to Todd, Todd said, look, Joe, we don't have they have 3 people on their staff to do this. They don't have a lot of resources to create, a blog, 5 blog posts a day like some companies do and just spread content all over the place. They said we have to be very strategic with the content that we create. So what they really look at, they have 5 key topic areas, and their goal is every story idea they come up with, they try to create 20 pieces of unique content around every story idea. I'm going to let that settle for a little bit because it's very important. If you have a story idea, if they have a story idea, they want 20 different uses of that content, focusing on different buyer personas and different channels, targeting about 100 plus different keywords that they target. Very, very important. Let me give you an example of how they do that. So here's an example of an ebook that they've done. It's called Talent Mobility, a very good topic for Kelly Global Workforce. Normally, if you're a normal, regular company, you'd just create the ebook and you'd be done. And people would move on and say, you'd promote it the best you can and you'd move on to the next one. That's not what Kelly does. This is just one of their deliverables. They also they take up that same content as they're working on it. They have a SlideShare version. They have a Pinterest version. There's a great infographic that goes on Pinterest. Then they take different white papers out of the ebook to target different buyer personas. So here's one on a white paper on the future of work there. Here's a different ebook on 3 things you need to know about talent. Here's another one on the 4 myths of talent that come from the big ebook, but they're targeted to different buyer personas at different places in the buying process, and on and on and on. And by the way, one of the really cool things that they do is, from a design standpoint, they go and talk to an artist, a designer, and they contract it all out, and they buy, basically a lot of this is one big mural that's been created, and then they digitize it, which is a great way to support local artists as well as get really good original art for this. But this is just an idea. So what I want you to do is the next time you talk about going back to your content strategy, think about, okay, why are we doing it? What's the story? Why are we doing it? And then look at all the channels that we have and how we can create something unique that specifically talks in that context for that channel. Number 3 is this idea of the chief storyteller. We have a magazine called the Chief Content Officer, by the way. It's free subscription to those who are qualified. Go ahead and type in Chief Content Officer and get it. But I believe that the core to the content marketing team is this role. By the way, what you're looking at right now, these are roles. These are not, you don't have to go out and hire a Chief Content Officer. Could be your VP of Marketing. Could be your Marketing Director. But the Chief Content Officer is the Chief Storyteller in charge of the content strategy. Then there are key roles underneath. This is what we see in every content marketing team if you're trying to operationalize your team. You have the Chief Content Officer. So there's the main storyteller in charge of the content strategy. Then you have the Managing Editor, which, by the way, I feel is the most important person in the marketing department right now. It's half storyteller, half project manager. That person is critical to getting everything done. Then you have a content producer. That's the person that makes everything look sexy in print, online, in person. Then you have a chief listening officer. Because why? Because when your content is sent out, you want 2 things to happen. First, you want some feedback to go out about how that content was reacted to, and that chief listening officer could be a social media manager, might need to route that feedback to customer service or product marketing or HR or whatever the case is. And also the chief listening officer, from a strategic standpoint, has to listen and get that information back to the chief content officer so that we can continually evolve the plan. Because the plan content strategy always changes. Every day you're making a tweak to that change as you're taking data and you're using that back for the benefit of the program. And then at the end you have content creators. Those content creators could be all of these people, could be none of these people, could be employees, could be other stakeholders, could be customers, could be whoever. So just keep that in mind if you're looking at putting together a content marketing team. These are the typical roles that are going to make it all happen. And why is this important? And why is having somebody own this content important, like a chief content officer? Because, frankly, you have content creators in every one of these silos, and every one of them feels they own content. And you know what? To a certain extent, they do. The problem is that these people aren't talking to each other. So what I would recommend, and to get out of the silos, I would recommend what SAS does. SAS is one of the I think the largest private technology company. What they do is every month, I think it's every Monday or Wednesday, all the people that are in charge of content in each one of these silos gets together. Because what was happening is people were doing duplicate content work. It was going all over the place. There wasn't a customer experience to be had because everybody was talking a little bit differently. Everybody had different buyer personas. It wasn't working well. So make sure, because we're not changing the structure of the marketing department anytime soon. So since that's the case, let's make sure that we back up and figure out how we get a consortium going with all these content owners in these groups. Show you some examples of the Chief Content Officer role. Like I said, Todd Wheatland, VP of Thought Leadership at Kelly Services, is a really good example. Another one is another good friend of mine, Rob Yogel, Content Marketing Director at Monotate. I show Rob's example because Rob was an editor at a traditional publishing company and was tapped to come over to the brand side, and we're seeing this more and more and more. I talk to journalism students all the time, and they're like, Joe, there's just no market out there for me. You know, what am I going to do? The media's not hiring. I said, the media's not hiring, but brands are hiring like crazy, because brands are terrible at telling stories, and they need good storytellers. So any of you with journalism backgrounds, if you're willing to go to the dark side a little bit, there's a lot of opportunity on the brand side. A couple more, and then we'll get to Q&A with Tim. This idea of leveraging employees in the content creation process, we get a lot of questions on it. I don't think a lot of people do it well, but one that does do it well is OpenView Venture Partners. OpenView is a VC company out of Boston, and they target entrepreneurs that are looking for venture capital investment. They're looking to really grow, and they need investment. And OpenView, basically, up to 2009, didn't do any content marketing. They leveraged very traditional marketing process, most of it by referrals. They had lots of expertise, but all the expertise was tied up in their employees. And how do they get that out and share that so more people could attract to them? So worked with Scott Maxwell, the CEO, back in 2009. We really worked on creating a vision statement, a mission statement, and this is right on their OpenView Lab site. You'll see it. Their mission is to produce ideas and inspiration that help readers build great companies, and here's how they do it. So what I want you to do is look at what your mission statement is to really get that, and this is a core part of their website presence. How did they get this started? Well, Scott Maxwell, the CEO, he really knew that their content was in their employees, and they needed to get all that expertise out of those employees, but it's very hard to do. As you know, it's very hard to get employees that aren't used to marketing to market. And one thing they did really well that I think was their secret sauce is they didn't force these employees into, oh, you have to have it this way, it has to be in a Word document, have to get it at this point. They had a content marketing manager, an editor, come in and really work with each of these people and extract those stories. Some of them were done by video, some were done by email, some were done by audio, over the phone, whatever the case was, to extract that content, and they had people help tell those stories so that made them look like rock stars. And it's been highly, highly successful. Here's what the blog has looked like. And then that evolved into this content platform, like we talked about with number one, OpenView Labs. They have over 1,000 pieces of content in an 18-month period. They had well over 1,000% plus increase in traffic, but we all know about traffic. That doesn't matter. What they have had is over 12,000 people sign up for their newsletter, which was huge, and that has become the pipeline for all their referrals. And they've lowered their sales cycle from 12 to 18 months to about 3 to 6 months. And that's all come from this content. And why is that? Is because when people go to OpenView now, they're all inbound leads now. They want to work with OpenView. They see them as the experts in this area, and they don't have to sell anymore. People come to them, they're ready to buy, so now OpenView can make the decision about whether they want to work with those people or not. So it's really, really amazing. And this is the last slide on this one. If you look at the content marketing funnel, which is on the left side, if you want to know more about the content marketing funnel, we detail this in Managing Content Marketing, my latest book with Robert Rose. But I wanted to put what they do in the middle against that funnel. So if you look at the blog and the content platform at the top, then once they get them in as suspects, they have ebooks dependent on who the buyer persona is, specific to that buyer persona. They nurture them through their e-newsletter as it goes on and work toward personalized versions of that. Once it becomes a customer, they have different ebooks targeting those people that are customers depending on what their needs are, and then every quarter they get together for a customer meeting. So it's a very simple, any one of you on the call could do a very simple program like this, and they didn't spend a lot of money on putting this together, but it was more a philosophy change and a different way of thinking. And this is the last one. I'll give you a couple little highlights on this because I want to make sure we have at least 10 minutes for Q&A. But talk about community content experience and basically leveraging influences in your organization to attract attention and grow your network. And I'm going to personally share some examples of what we've done at the Content Marketing Institute. I told Tim a little bit about this, about what we were doing from a content standpoint. We use an influencer model similar to the way American Express Open Forum uses their influencer model in the content that we create. So I'm hoping if there's some ideas that I can give you that we use that you can steal, that's fantastic, and kind of go through our process. We produce one piece of content, about 750 words to 1,000 words on our blog every day, 7 days a week. And 95% of the contents created are from influencers. They're not from staff. So we go out, we vet influencers, we vet contributors, and we get them in. And by the way, when they turn in their raw content to us, we have 2 editors and a title person that works on that, because what we want them to do is we want, like Jonathan Crossfield here is one of our contributors from Australia, I want Jonathan to look like a rock star. Because if Jonathan looks like a rock star, what happens? Jonathan will share it with his network. Because I know who my network is, I know who CMI's network is, but I want Jonathan's network, because I don't have Jonathan's network, and I want Jonathan's network's network. I want to keep going on and on and on so we can build and get the word out about the great stuff that we're doing here, but we have to get outside of our normal network to do that. So we really looked at the influencer strategy as key to getting that done. Where most companies make a mistake in their influencer strategy, they don't have enough editorial. Raw content is one thing, folks. Editing is where the magic happens. If you're having problems getting really amazing epic type content that's churning out of your company, it's probably because you don't have the editorial expertise to get it done. And of course, I love editors, and our editors do a great, fantastic job. And then we just started working with a title person to really get key titles working for us. Our calls to action, if you want to, Tim would say this is what we focus on, our conversion. We have one conversion on every page, and it's this one, and we want people to sign up for our email. I believe that subscription and audience development is everything to brands today. If you talk about brands becoming media companies, what is the difference? The difference in owned media is that we have an audience to create content for. We don't have to rent the audience anymore. We want our own audience. So we've personally been able to build it up to about 40,000 people signed up to get our daily and weekly updates, and that is our audience. And everything else we do, 95% of the revenue that we drive at CMI comes originally from somebody signing up to our content. But again, you have to have great content. You have to build that network to do it. We use things like Pippity is a sign-up form, pop-up form that works with WordPress. I'm not a big fan as a user of pop-ups, but as a publisher, I love pop-ups. I love Pippity. We get over 50% of our sign-ups on our site directly coming from this pop-up form, and we give away a nice ebook for them, and we get them signed up to our form. A couple more things I want to talk about, things that I think we've done pretty well. We give away content gifts. I really believe this. If you're trying to get an influencer program and try to get more people to share your content, you first have to share their content. It's a big mistake most brands make. They reach out to influencers right away and say, oh, would you share my stuff? No, they won't. They probably won't even return your email if you've got an actual personalized email to them. If you're going to make this work, you have to get on their radar first, and you have to focus on giving their content away to your audience if it is relevant. We did that with our content marketing playbook. We had over 50 case studies in this playbook, and every one of them came from an influencer or a customer. And what happened when those influencers or customers found out that their case studies were in here? They shared it with their network. So the reason why we had over 50,000 downloads of this playbook, it's because of that influencer, that gift-giving strategy from a content standpoint. We also use something called Social Media 411, where once you define your hit list of influencers, basically an influencer would be where your customers are hanging out when they're not hanging out on your site. We want to share their content. So if you look at Social Media 411, the one on the right, that is your promotional content. Let's say on Twitter, every 6 things that you share, 1 can be promotional. 1 can be your content, your educational content on your website, and 4 can be influencer content that you're going to tag and promote from other people. Most brands have that backwards. They share way more content of their own than other people's. But if you want to build that influential network, you've got to share. You've got to give those gifts to make it work. And I know we're running a little bit tight on time. Let me mention a couple more things, and I'm going to pass it back to Tim. If you're not using SlideShare, especially B2B companies, I think you're missing out. I call these bricks, big substantial pieces of content that are bricks. Only about 20% of B2B companies use SlideShare. SlideShare is like the YouTube for PowerPoints. I love it because we generate a ton of leads from SlideShare, and you can put in a form at about slide 8 or 10 like we do here, and people can sign up and get our information, so they don't always have to convert on our site. They can convert on other sites. And then the last thing I would talk about is this idea of brandscaping, which is basically, the brandscaping as a term was coined by my friend Andrew Davis, who wrote the book Brandscaping, but it's the idea of leveraging partners, non-competitive partners, to create your content. So in this case, we worked with Jay Bear of Convince and Convert, created the field guide to content marketing metrics. So what's wonderful about that, we leveraged each other's resources to create it, and we had double the network of distribution because we used both of our distributions. And I think if more of us did that, we would get more bang for our bucks to really get this done. The last slide that I would say here, and then I'll pass it back to you, Tim, I would just say you got to get a little bit uncomfortable with this. A lot of these processes are publishing processes. They're not marketing processes. And I really do believe this. If you don't feel like you're going to run off the road, you're probably not driving fast enough, but I would caveat that with the fact that you've got to start with a content strategy. And if you're going to start somewhere, please start with a content marketing mission statement. And that's where I would start if you're not doing any of this. I know we're going to get to Q&A, but there's all my information. Content Marketing World is coming up in Cleveland, September 9th through 12th. And Content Marketing World Sydney is coming up in March 4th, 5th, and 6th. And there's my other stuff. But Tim, I think I took enough of the floor, and I want to throw it back to you.
Wow. Okay. Who thinks that Joe's originally from the East Coast? Because that was like kind of New York speed. Thank you, Joe. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
We've had a lot of comments in the question section that was saying, hey, is this recording going to be available? Because I can't take notes fast enough. So thank you for that. So I'm going to just throw up a slide here during the Q&A. We've got some good questions. I would encourage all of you to go to your control panel and enter some questions, and I'll try to get to as many as I can. And then, Joe, if you're open to it, we'll send you the remainder of them if you want to have you or your staff, kind of follow up on some of them.
That would be fantastic. Sure.
All right. So let's talk about a few things that people brought up. One of them is, and I'm like, oops, the slideshow keeps going on here. I apologize, folks. Yeah, it seems like we're jinxed with technical difficulties, and again, I apologize. Let's talk first about this notion of the right content for the right stage of your kind of sales funnel. Now, there's awareness, interest, desire, and action. Now, all of us want that lead, at the very last minute. The ones that are at the bottom of the funnel. How much of your content should be aimed at the top of the funnel and kind of awareness and other stages?
It's a good question, Tim. The answer, I know most people want a specific answer, but I can't give one because it depends on where you're weak. I know we work with companies that are very, very weak on the top of the funnel, and other ones where I call it the messy middle, have nothing going on in the middle. And they're throwing out all kinds of stuff, and they don't have personalization, and they can't figure that whole thing out, which, by the way, is not easy to do, especially if you've got multiple buyer personas. So I guess what I would say, and this is the easiest way to start. If you look at the buying process, really take an honest look about where you're having the most pain, or maybe where your customers are having the most pain, and you can't move them through to another area of the buying cycle. Whatever that is, focus on that and say, what can I do from a content standpoint to help alleviate that pain and move them from step, let's say, C to step D?
Okay,
and that's what I would look at.
And this goes to a lot of folks are starting to use, especially in business to business, like using marketing automation systems to kind of, in a more targeted way, talk to folks in the middle of the funnel. We happen to use Infusionsoft. There's, of course, Marketo and Eloqua at the kind of enterprise level. If you guys aren't using these kind of things and you have a long, high-ticket sales cycle, you really need to start thinking about how to do that and lead scoring and things like that. Right?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's. So a couple of folks had questions about syndication. Okay, it's great that you created all this content, but shouldn't there be a separate strategy for recycling it, getting it on YouTube, maximizing SEO value, and like you say, reach it through other people's networks to publish it? How do you syndicate the content?
No, it's a very important question, Tim, and this is where as I see a lot of structural breakdown in the process, because what will happen is marketing or the custom publishing team in the organization will create the content, and then they'll throw it over to somebody in charge of syndication, and by that time it's too late, because you have to think about that first. And we can get to the different ways to do that, but what I want you to do is I want you to think about the ways you're going to syndicate it before you create the content. So that's step one. Please do that first, and then you look at, because you have the strategy first, and then you have a channel strategy. Most brands go to the channel strategy first and then try to back their way into a content strategy, and I'm like, oh, please don't do that, because you miss out on a huge opportunity.
And it's the same like with SEO. You build SEO in when you're designing a site. You don't try to retrofit it after you've developed your whole site. That would be a big and expensive mistake, right?
Exactly.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. I was just going to say on syndication, there's lots of different ways that we can go into. I mean, you've got your own organic syndication through social media, but I would look at partner distribution, and syndication is key. So look at some of those co-creation opportunities to help syndicate your content and get that word out on networks that you don't have access to.
Well, and folks, if you're thinking about it, this is a very self-referential comment we just made. Joe is reaching our SiteTuners audience with his content by partnering up, and so this is a perfect example of how to do that. So if you have expertise that you want to share and you know audiences that would be receptive to it, try to get in front of them. Before we go on,
Tim, can I say one thing really quick, Tim, because it's really important, and this is a thing that most brands don't do. You have, because you do it as well. You get out and speak. You do a great job. You do webinars. You do in person. I try to do the same thing. Most brands don't have multiple people that can do that. You need to find a couple spokespeople for your organization, get them out and doing this kind of stuff, and if they don't know how to speak, find people that do, or sign them up for Toastmasters and teach them how to speak, because most brands representatives are horrible presenters.
That's right, especially if you're in big companies. Just because somebody has knowledge of a particular product or service, and that doesn't mean they're a good presenter. At Conversion Conference, we always make sure that they're solid presenters before anything else. Speaking of Conversion Conference, you, as I mentioned, our top-rated speaker at our last Florida event. As you can see, our 2013 calendar is up there. The next show, or probably our biggest ever, is going to be in April in San Francisco. It's in parallel with several other online marketing shows. And if you use the promo code you're seeing there, Joe's10, you'll get 150 off. This expires soon, the same time as the early bird. So if you're thinking about it, go check out conversionconference.com, and I hope to see you there. Okay, another question we had was, when should you restrict content? All the salespeople go, okay, I want that 17-field lead form filled out before I give you any value at all. What do you think about that kind of approach?
Well, I worked with a company recently. 95% of their content was gated. They were wondering why they didn't have more social media sharing. And I had to laugh. I'm like, well, because nobody's going to share content that's gated. The way that I would answer that, Tim, is only put a field in front of it if you absolutely have to get lead information from that. If that's the way, I mean, if you look at most of the content that an organization should create, I would say a good rule of thumb is about 90% should be free-flowing, accessible. It should be feathers that lead to these content bricks, that lead to these very valuable pieces of content that people are willing to give up their personal information to. So if you have so much that's under lock and key, considering taking parts of that, make it free, make it shareable, put it out to SlideShare and other ways so that you can leave breadcrumbs back to those forums.
Yeah, and I would say in general that it's appropriate when someone's shown buying intent to start asking them for more information in exchange for giving them more value. But in general, the further it is at the top of the funnel, the more likely it is that it should be unrestricted. And then as people want, okay, the buyer's guide to picking a database company, okay, that's obviously deep in the funnel. They're showing buyer intent. Then you can ask them for their email or their contact information. Basically, that's the idea. We had a question from James White here. How much of your content should be text-based? There's so many other options. What are the different formats of content, and what some are more expensive to create? Can you talk about those trade-offs?
Well, there's no rule of thumb. Most of the content we create is textual. I would say most content that most organizations create is textual, but we've got to We understand that the way the consumer preferences are working, things like Facebook and Pinterest, we're seeing there are more vehicles available for visual content. So I think what you need to do is look at your overall content strategy right now and how can you create visual opportunities out of those. I'll give you an example. So if you're creating a textual blog post, really be considerate of what that visual image is, because there's a sharing opportunity with that visual image. What we do on our we've completely changed our Facebook strategy. We used to create the blog, send it out to Twitter, send it out to Facebook. We don't do that anymore. We have a content strategy on Facebook that's completely separate, and it's almost entirely visual. And we create content as part of the plan, and if you do that in line like we talked about, it doesn't have to take some quotes, take some new imagery, hire some designers on that want to do something that's integrated with some of your other content stuff. It doesn't take a lot, but you have to think of it ahead of time. I would say go more visual now. Start planning for it now.
I would agree with that. My keynote in San Francisco at the Conversion Conference is going to be about talking to your primitive reptilian brain and how to influence it. Half of your brain is actually devoted to processing visual information. And if you're clear about the little tricks that Facebook and LinkedIn and Pinterest and Instagram use and how they publish your stuff, you'll be able to insert a very dynamic thumbnail image into every one of those posts that appear on other people's walls and so on. And without that, it's going to get lost in the shuffle. I think graphics are the killer app.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about, you talked a lot about large marketing departments, but Melinda has questions about, okay, what about, bootstrapping? How do I do this if I'm a one-man band, essentially?
Well, is that Melinda? Melinda, I feel for you, because in 2007 I bootstrapped the Content Marketing Institute business, and it was just me. And you can do a lot of damage with an amazing blog. What I would say from that standpoint is you have to be consistent, and you have to have a point of view. And the third thing is make sure you focus on email subscription. Very important. I see so many blogs that basically just create a lot of content. They're doing it for SEO, they're doing it for social, but they're not getting that conversion. And that conversion to you should be getting that email address so you can continue that conversation. I think that if you have a really good niche, focus on a niche that you can be the leading expert in the world. And if you pick a niche that you can't be the leading expert in the world, you didn't go small enough.
That's right.
Jack Welch,
Jack Welch, when he took over GE, he basically did a survey of all their businesses, and he said, if we can't be number one or number two in that category, however broadly and narrowly defined it is, let's get out of that business and sell it. So that's very powerful to be whatever, the thought leader and however narrowly you define your niche. Holly had a quick question. The name of the WordPress plugin for signups that you mentioned?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's Pippity. I believe it's Pippity or something like that. But we've used it for about a year now, and nothing but good things. And I don't represent them or work for them at all. So.
Okay. Well, no disclaimers needed. But we've gone a little bit past our time. Again, for all of you people that are not speed writers, this recording will be available. We'll send you a link in the follow-up email. So thank you again for your time, and I'll hope you'll join us for more thought leader conversations in the conversion space. A round of applause, a silent virtual one, for our presenter, Joe Pulizzi. Thank you, Joe, and we look forward to having you back at a future event.
Wonderful, Tim. Thank you.